He shouldn't have survived. At 20,000 feet, the sky was a fractured canvas of grey clouds streaked with black smoke, and his twin-engine fighter shuddered violently as metal twisted and groaned under stress. Lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the jagged edges of a world in chaos. Somewhere deep inside the fuselage, instruments sparked, flickered, and died one by one. The engine on the left coughed, its roar breaking into ragged gasps. The right engine followed seconds later, the sound screaming the aircraft's imminent failure. The wind howled through gaps torn in the metal skin, and the cockpit was hot with smoke that burned his lungs with every breath. Pain shot through his hands and forearms, raw and intense, as he gripped the controls. His gloves had melted in places, the seams of the cockpit fabric tore under heat. The fire wasn't just a threat, it was alive, slithering along the panels, feeding on fuel lines that leaked from jagged holes. Every second was a contest: survive the flames, keep the aircraft down, or plummet into the storm below. The alarms on the dashboard screeched like dying banshees. Oil pressure dropped, hydraulic systems failed, and warning lights blinked furiously in red. Smoke curled in thick streams, blinding him, filling his nostrils, choking his throat. This wasn't a moment to think. Training meant nothing now. Every procedure in the manuals assumed time, distance, space to maneuver. He had none. He made decisions in instinct alone, and instinct demanded action. Hands burned as he ripped away insulation with bare fingers, smothering the flames inch by inch. Sparks landed on his helmet and visor, crackling with heat that seared his face. Pain became irrelevant. Survival demanded singular focus. Sweat and blood blurred together, dripping into the instruments and onto the floor of the cockpit. Metal bent beneath his fingers, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Somewhere far below, clouds split to reveal the rolling fields of the continent. A flash of lightning lit the horizon. He caught a glimpse of the ground, a patchwork of forests and rivers, winding roads, and isolated villages, all oblivious to the struggle raging above them. Above them, the sky was dying, and he clung to life by the thinnest thread. The fire sputtered, then subsided under his frantic, desperate intervention. Smoke lingered, black and choking, but it no longer consumed the cockpit. The aircraft groaned, but held together. A faint hum returned from the engines, half alive, half dead, but enough to give him hope. Hope, however fragile, could not be wasted. Every action demanded immediate follow-up: flaps, rudders, throttles, controls he checked. Rechecked and improvised. Instruments were damaged, gauges unreadable, wires severed. He had no idea if the readings were real, but he guessed. Calibrated by experience and instinct. The aircraft leaned perilously to the left. He corrected with micro-adjustments, hands shaking, arms burning. The wind tore at the fuselage, attempting to rip the aircraft apart. Below him, the storm intensified. Thunder roared like artillery, and wind currents tossed him like a leaf. Visibility dropped to a few 100 feet. Clouds hid the landscape entirely. Lightning fought closer, striking within miles of the aircraft. He felt the vibrations in the fuselage before he saw the flashes, the resonance in metal echoing like gunfire. He thought briefly of the men who had trained him, the maps he had memorized, the flights logged as exercises, but all of that mattered nothing in the face of this inferno in the sky. He remembered the warning in the flight manual: if fire reaches critical systems, bail out immediately. Critical systems were gone. Immediate was now. He considered it parachute, escape, surrender to gravity and fake, but he couldn't. Not yet. The storm below was a churning grave. The fields and rivers offered no sanctuary. He was already dead in some sense, yet the living part of him refused to acknowledge it. Time slowed. Every second stretched into 100. Every breath burned. Sweat burned. Pain burned. He ripped at the final patch of flame near the fuel line. Fingers blistered. Nails blackened. Sparks shot off into the cockpit, bouncing against instruments, yet he held firm. Then, as if the gods themselves had intervened, the fire finally died. Smoke lingered, acrid and suffocating, but the threat was gone. He exhaled slowly, almost forgetting that the storm still raged round him. He felt, for the first time, the weight of survival. The aircraft was damaged, barely functioning, but it was airborne. That fact alone was miraculous. He allowed himself a fleeting thought of relief, quickly replaced by awareness. He was still thousands of feet above the ground, engines unstable, wing panels bent, controls barely responsive. Any sudden movement could trigger catastrophe. He adjusted throttle and rudder, testing the aircraft's response. The controls were sluggish, unpredictable. He fought to maintain altitude, to stay above the worst of the storm, using every ounce of strength to counteract the aircraft's own instability. Lightning illuminated the sky in harsh, bright flashes, casting the cockpit in temporary, blinding clarity. He saw the twisted metal, the blackened fuselage, the scorched instruments, and he realized just how close he had come to oblivion. Below, lightning lit a river snaking through the countryside. Forests, tiny villages, roads, everything seemed serene from above, a sharp contrast to the chaos of his cockpit. He thought briefly of home, of the fields and skies he had known as a child, of the pilot training hours logged in calm, controlled conditions. None of that could prepare a person for this sky on fire, a machine failing, and a life hanging by fragile threads. Minutes or hours, he couldn't tell past. The storm lessened, giving him a sliver of navigable air. He set his course, heading toward the friendly airfield hundreds of miles away, damaged but operational. Every mile would be a test. Every moment, a choice between life and death. The aircraft groaned as he maneuvered, wing flexing, fuselage vibrating. Instruments flickered in warning. Smoke still lingered faintly in the cockpit. But he moved forward, and forward was enough. Time became an ally, as the storm began to drift away. The first slivers of sun broke through, a pale, trembling light in the horizon. Below, he saw the countryside of a nation at war, bombed-out fields, smoking villages, roads scarred by tanks and artillery. Yet all he could focus on was the damaged machine beneath him and the fragile life it carried. Every adjustment, every micro-correction, every tense movement of hand and foot mattered more than anything he had ever done. The airfield came into view, a cluster of runways and hangars surrounded by anti-aircraft emplacements. They were expecting him, or rather, expecting a dead aircraft and a missing pilot. He had no communication with the ground. The engine faltered again. The left wing dipped. He corrected with violent inputs. Sweat streamed down his face, stinging his eyes, but he refused to look away from the instruments, from the horizon, from the fragile path that still existed. He made his approach. Every second counted. Every movement could be his last. The damaged landing gear refused to extend fully. He improvised, adjusting flaps and speed. The aircraft lurched dangerously, skimming the runway like a wounded bird. Gravel and debris kicked up in clouds as he touched down, sliding hundreds of feet before finally grinding to a halt. The engines coughed their final protests. Silence followed. Medics and ground crew rushed to him. He was alive. The aircraft was barely intact. Flames smoldered, instruments smoked. Yet he had survived. He stumbled from the cockpit, face streaked with soot and sweat, hands blackened, gloves gone. Officers stared in disbelief, some questioning his story, others speechless. He had defied physics, probability, and reason. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. He should have surrendered the moment he hit the ground. The frozen fields stretched for miles, pale under a weak winter sun. Snow crunched under every cautious step, each sound amplified in the emptiness. His fingers were stiff, face raw from wind, sweat, and soot. The bomber was behind him now, a burned-out husk that barely made it to the runway. Every instinct told him to stay still, to wait for friendly forces, but something inside rebelled. Survival wasn't passive. Survival was action. Enemy patrols were close. He could hear them before he saw them. The distant crunch of boots, the low murmur of voices, the click of rifles being tested. He had no map, no radio, no reinforcement. Only the clothes on his back, a pistol with 6 rounds, and a single, burning determination to stay alive. He moved through the shadows of the hangars, using wreckage and equipment for cover. Each breath was visible, each movement potentially betraying him. The patrols swept past, unaware of his presence, voices drifting closer and then farther. His heart pounded, adrenaline hammering in his temples. Every step demanded calculation. Left, right, crouch, freeze. Mistakes were fatal. By midday, he found a small storage shed, abandoned in the wake of the war's chaos. Inside, he discovered canned food, water, and a first aid kit. The supplies were scant, but enough to stabilize him. He treated his blistered hands, bandaged minor cuts, and drank deeply, the icy water numbing more than quenching. Yet, even as he rested, he knew he couldn't stay. Every hour delayed increased the risk. Night fell, and the air grew colder. Frost clung to his eyelashes, biting at exposed skin. The stars overhead were distant and indifferent, offering no guidance, only silent witness. He moved again, this time along the edges of a forest, using trees and underbrush as camouflage. He spotted lights in the distant enemy encampments, perhaps, or supply lines. A rational mind would have avoided them entirely. His mind was no longer rational. Opportunity and survival intertwined. He knew the terrain ahead. Intelligence reports and reconnaissance flights had taught him to read rivers, roads, and forests as if they were books. Every landmark was a guide, every shadow a potential threat. At one point, he froze as a patrol passed within 50 feet. He held his breath, pressed against a tree, feeling the pulse of the earth through his boots. The soldiers moved on, and he exhaled, letting relief wash through him for just a second before sharpening his focus. The following day brought hunger he had never known. The body burns for 1,000 calories a day just to stay alive in cold weather, and he had nothing. Every step felt heavier, every breath more labored. Muscles screamed in protest. He scavenged what he could: roots, frozen berries, scraps from abandoned buildings, but nothing satisfied the need. Pain became background noise. Determination overrode it. He observed enemy routines from a distance. Soldiers moved in predictable patterns. Guards rotated shifts. Supply trucks followed the same paths daily. He learned without leaving cover, memorizing schedules, counting patrols, tracking every detail. Knowledge became a weapon. Each observation allowed him to make a decision that would increase his odds, sometimes by inches, sometimes by miles. By the third night, Hunger and exhaustion pushed him to his limits. He rested only in the most concealed positions, but sleep was impossible. Dreams of fire and falling aircraft haunted him, interspersed with flashes of patrols and weapons aimed in his direction. Consciousness became a battle between mind and body. He refused to lose. On the fourth day, he found the airfield he had attacked before. It was heavily guarded, but it also offered the supplies he desperately needed. The depot contained rifles, ammunition, fuel, and, most importantly, aircraft. One fighter in particular caught his eye, a sleek, German-built model, camouflaged partially beneath netting, engine roaring under maintenance. He had never flown a plane like this, never read the controls, never experienced its systems, but he knew how to fly. All aircraft shared the same basic principles: throttle, rudder, stick, lift, drag. This knowledge, combined with courage bordering on insanity, gave him a single, audacious plan. Night fell. The airfield became a silent world of shadows. Guards rotated, but he timed it perfectly, moving under the cover of darkness. 80 yards of open ground separated him from the fighter. Every movement had to be precise. One misstep, one rustle of debris, could be fatal. His ankle throbbed from the parachute landing, but pain was irrelevant. Opportunity demanded risk. He reached the aircraft. The canopy was locked, but he found the release. Every second mattered. Inside the cockpit, everything was unfamiliar. Gauges, levers, dials each marked in German script. He had no idea where the fuel selector was, the starter, or the throttle. But the physics remained constant. He tested each control, piecing together a plan from memory, observation and intuition. Then he pulled the starter handle. The engine coughed, then roared to life, a thunderous, impossible sound in the still night. Seconds counted. Guards could hear every vibration. He pushed forward. The fighter lurched, tail rising almost immediately. Trees flashed past at terrifying speed. The aircraft was alive under his hands and willing to be tamed. The airfield blurred beneath him, obstacles, hangars, and trucks flashing in near darkness. He leveled the fighter, gaining speed, and broke into open sky. Freedom felt like fire in his chest, and terror and exhilaration became inseparable. At treetop level, he navigated through the darkened landscape, invisible to radar, too fast for a ground troop's aim. The forest blurred beneath him, each branch a potential executioner. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and everything ended. He thought of the storm, the fire in the cockpit, the patrols. He survived them all. Could he survive this? He refused to consider the alternative. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and his own breathing. Dawn broke, revealing fields scarred by war, trenches, burned villages, roads cut by tanks. Every mile brought him closer to safety, every second a test of nerves and skill. He glimpsed the horizon-friendly territory, though still a long distance away. Even as relief threatened to settle in, he knew survival demanded vigilance. He made micro-adjustments constantly, correcting pitch, speed, and angle, aware that the aircraft was unfamiliar, heavier than any plane he had flown, more powerful and unpredictable. Every decision mattered. Every second demanded absolute attention. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he crossed into Allied territory. The first recognition of friendly troops was a shock. Soldiers aimed weapons at him, seeing only the German markings on the fighter. He dove lower, faster, weaving between hedgerows. Shots rang out as bullets splashed round him. He pressed onward, pushing the aircraft to its limits, until at last he touched down on the runway, sliding hundreds of yards, narrowly avoiding collisions with other aircraft. The cockpit hissed and smoked. He emerged, mud and soot covering him, hands blackened, gloves destroyed. Officers stared, incredulous. Ground crew froze. He had done the impossible, infiltrated enemy territory, evaded capture, commandeered an enemy fighter, and returned alive. He didn't celebrate. The storm of survival was not over. Lessons remained, enemies remained, and war demanded more than courage. It demanded calculation, timing, and relentless audacity. But for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. He had survived. And he knew, deep down, that surviving was only the beginning. Each question was met with the same answer, a terse account of survival, risk, and improvisation. Few could believe it. Even his commanding officer shook his head. "You shouldn't be alive," he muttered. But there was no time for celebration. Orders came immediately. The war was ongoing, and Bruce Carr was needed for reconnaissance missions. The experience in enemy territory had sharpened his instincts to a razor's edge. One BF-109 rolled violently and spiraled toward the ground. Another attempted evasive maneuvers, but he was ready. His attacks were swift, decisive, each shot measured within minutes. Multiple aircraft were destroyed, scattering the enemy formation even after the skirmish. The fight was far from over. Ground forces fired intermittently. Radar installations tracked every movement, and the skies remained dangerous. Each flight, each engagement, was an exercise in calculated risk, pushing both man and machine to the brink. By the end of the campaign season, Bruce had accumulated numerous kills, disrupted enemy operations, and earned high decorations, but he knew that medals and recognition were secondary. The true measure was survival, mastery of skill, and the ability to turn desperation into opportunity. And yet, even as the Allies advanced and the war shifted, Bruce understood that the greatest challenges lay ahead. Each new mission would demand more than courage. It would demand ingenuity, audacity, and an unbreakable will. Survival had taught him one lesson above all in war. The impossible was only a suggestion. Bruce prepared for the next challenge, understanding fully that the true measure of heroism was not in legend, but in audacious, calculated action taken when the odds were impossible. The war was far from over, but Bruce Carr had proven one immutable truth. Courage alone was never enough. Survival demanded skill, audacity, and the courage to act when every standard told him to surrender. Each mission carried echoes of the past: the stolen fighter, evasions behind enemy lines, engagements with overwhelming numbers. News of his actions had reached the top brass. and they praised him publicly. But privately, his commanding officers debated whether audacity, genius, or sheer luck had made him successful. Bruce knew the truth. Skill alone could not explain the moments when instinct and opportunity intersected perfectly. His next missions demonstrated that truth repeatedly. Fleets of enemy aircraft attempted to intercept Allied bombers, Bruce's squadron. Often outnumbered 10 to 1, struck with precision, breaking formations, scattering the opposition and minimizing Allied losses. Ground crews whispered in disbelief. The same pilot who had stolen a German fighter now led men through the most dangerous skies of Europe. Yet to Bruce, it wasn't remarkable, it was necessary. Survival demanded it. Medals arrived: Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross. Each ceremony felt surreal. Friends and families applauded. But the internal weight of those missions lingered. Bruce knew every enemy aircraft he downed had pilots, humans, with families, fears, and courage of their own. Heroism, he realized, wasn't about recognition, it was about choices under fire. When logic, instinct, and moral courage collided, even with recognition, contradictions persisted. Fellow pilots admired his courage but questioned his methods. Officers praised his initiative but fretted over risk management. The historical record would note kills, missions, medals, and battles, but it could never convey the seconds in which decisions were made. The split-moment judgments that separated survival from death. Bruce carried that knowledge. Quietly, history would simplify him. He would not. By April 1945, the European theater was collapsing. The Luftwaffe was exhausted, resources dwindling, morale breaking. Yet Bruce flew relentlessly. Reconnaissance missions, escorting bombers, intercepting enemy aircraft each day presented a new challenge. His reputation preceded him. Some enemy pilots surrendered on sight. Others underestimated him at their peril. Each engagement reinforced a lesson he had learned in the frozen forests of Czechoslovakia. Never allow expectation to dictate action. The infamous day came when Bruce led for P-51s against a formation of 60 enemy fighters. The odds were staggering. Manuals dictated retreat. Logic demanded it. But Bruce acted differently. He attacked. Precise and relentless, enemy planes fell under disciplined fire. Wingmen accounted for additional kills. Allied bombers reached their targets unscathed. It was audacity applied with cold calculation, a final demonstration of everything he had become. Fearless, intuitive, and supremely skilled. After the war, Bruce's legacy was complicated. Records highlighted kills, missions, medals, but omitted the stolen fighter. The days behind enemy lines, the solo flights of survival. He never sought fame. He flew because the mission demanded it, because survival required it, because leadership meant taking responsibility others feared. Heroism, he understood, was a function of choices, not applause. He continued to serve, joining post-war aerobatic teams. Then Korea, flying jet fighters, leading squadrons, teaching young pilots. Each conflict tested a new generation of aircraft, new strategies, but the principles remained constant. Observation, skill, audacity, and decisiveness. Bruce adapted, surviving in 3 wars. Across aircraft generations. Under circumstances no manual could prepare a pilot for. Yet even as the accolades accumulated, contradictions remained. How could the same man be reckless enough to steal a fighter behind enemy lines, yet disciplined enough to lead squadrons to victory? How could heroism exist alongside humility? Bruce never answered. The questions were irrelevant. Actions, not interpretations, defined reality. By the time he retired in 1973, Bruce Carr had flown over 500 combat missions across 3 wars and countless medals and survived moments where death was almost certain. He returned home quietly, refusing public glorification, content that his work had saved lives, protected others, and maintained the fragile thread of victory. In later years, he reflected on the moments that defined him: the frozen forests of Czechoslovakia, the stolen Focke-Wulf, the impossible dogfights, the overwhelming formations he had faced alone. Each memory was vivid, visceral, and unromanticized. Heroism was not about recognition, legacy, or medals. Observers marveled, but Bruce saw only opportunity, the aircraft and the pilot testing limits, measuring skill, embracing audacity. Some things never changed. Courage and calculation remained constant companions. Bruce Carr died in 1998. Buried with honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Medals, wars, ranks listed on the stone, but the stolen fighter. The 4 days behind enemy lines, the belly landing with no gear. The impossibly audacious flights, those stories existed only in whispers, journals. And memory, heroism, he had understood, could never fit neatly on a headstone. History would remember his kills, missions, and accolades. But the essence of his legacy, the courage to face impossible odds, to turn desperation into opportunity, to act decisively when logic screamed retreat, belonged only to those who witnessed it, and to the man who lived it. And so, Bruce Carr's story ended not with glory, but with a lesson for all who followed. The measure of heroism is not the medal, the record, or the legend. It is the choice to act when failure seems inevitable, the refusal to surrender to fear, and the audacity to see opportunity where others see impossibility.